Hi, welcome back. We are back for part 2 of No End House. Yeah, I know my face is red, ignore it. I just had a facial done and they aren't exactly always pleasant. Not if they're done right. It had been 3 weeks since I heard any word from David. In the 6th month since we started dating, we had only gone 3 days without talking, and that was after a pretty intense fight. There was nothing out of the ordinary when I had talked to him last. He had just mentioned that he was going to check something out a friend told him about. But then I got a really weird text the night before. It was from David, and it wasn't from his number. It was only 5 words in it. No end. Don't come, David. Yogurt. Sorry. Something was wrong. After I read the text, I felt nauseous, like I was seeing something I shouldn't. I decided to get a hold of Peter, but I had talked to this asshole before. He was a deadbeat, but at least he might have some information on where David might be. I decided to log onto AIM with David's account. I figured it would be easier to start something with Peter if he didn't know it was me. When I logged on, he immediately messaged me. David, holy shit, you had me worried. I thought you went to the house. What do you mean? No End House, man, that place I told you about. I could have sworn you were going to go. No End, this guy knew what was going on. You actually couldn't find it. Maybe I'll try tomorrow. Where was it again? No way. You already had me worried. Fuck. That place, I've been there. You do not want to go there. Peter, this is Maggie. Wait, what? Where's David? I don't know. I thought you would know, but apparently not. Oh shit. What? Seriously, Peter, you need to tell me what's going on. I think he went to the house. It's outside of town, maybe 4 miles down Tarrant Street, unmarked road, turn right. Shit, man, he's gone. No, I don't think he is. What are you planning on doing? I'm going to get him back. I left the next night at around 8. There wasn't a single car the entire trip, and as I turned onto the unmarked street, I saw a sign pointing down the road. No End, this way, open 24 hours.
Who did this? Who are you? Carter, it's me, Ryan. I did this.
My breathing hadn't been steady since I left my house, and seeing the house didn't help anything. There weren't any other cars around, which made me think that it wasn't open. A light from the front stoop illuminated the area surrounding, and the windows showed that lights were on inside. I parked my car and walked up to the front and made my way in. The front lobby was normal enough, but like I predicted, there wasn't anyone there. All the lights were on, but no one was there besides the door I came through. There was only one other. Posted next to it was another sign. Room 1, this way. 8 more follow. Reach the end and you win. That wasn't what made my stomach sink. That wasn't what stopped my heart. There was more below, scrawled and handwritten in red. You won't save him. I must have stood in the lobby for an hour. I was frozen. I didn't know how to go on. Did I go through the door? Did I call the police after reading the sign? I decided that I may have bit off more than I could chew. I am average height for a girl, but pretty thin. I wasn't about to fight off some psycho that was holding David hostage. I decided calling the cops was the best thing to do, so I reached into my pocket and opened my cell phone. Took my phone to call. No service. The house must be blocking the signal, and it was basically in the middle of nowhere. I walked toward the entrance, figured I'd find service outside. I reached to the knob and twisted, and nothing. It was locked. I shook it harder. Nothing. It was locked from the outside. I slammed my hands against the door and called out to anyone that could hear me. I knew it was useless. No one was out here except me. Then I felt a vibrate in my pocket. I reached down and looked at my phone. One unread text. At first, I was really glad I had service. I was saved. Maybe the text was from David, that he was alright. It was from a different number, one I didn't have in my phone. I pressed open and nearly dropped the phone. You can't save yourself either. My entire body was shaking. I wanted to pass out. I was stuck there. A cell phone with no service in a room with no exit. I scanned the room and landed on the door across the room. A gold one was mounted on the front. It looked like a room door in a hotel. The ground felt far away as I walked closer to the door. In a few moments, I was within inches, and I placed my head against the wood and listened. All I heard was distant Halloween music, just creepy instrumental music you'd hear at any haunted house. Suddenly, I got a little calmer. David was always known for his pranks. He would tell me about these elaborate setups he and his friends would make for the new players on their soccer team. Somehow, a smile found its way under my face, and I opened the door without fear. Entering the first room alleviated my fears even more. The room was a completely normal attempt at a haunted house, though rather lacking. In each corner was a scarecrow, but not even scary ones. They were the kind you used to see in grade school, with a big smiling face. Paper ghosts hung from the ceiling, and a fan in the corner added a cold breeze that made them spin. Next to one of the scarecrows was again the only other door in the room. Printed on the front, similar to the first, was a large 2. I laughed and left this lame room behind. When I opened the door to room 2, I couldn't see 3 feet in front of my face. It was completely filled with a gray mist that smelled like rubber. I guess there had to be some fog machine in here, and it must have been pumping this stuff for hours. There were no windows in the last room, so the ventilation must have been terrible. I walked slowly forward and let out a small shriek. I had bumped straight into a large robotic Jason Voorhees. His eyes flashed red and the knife in his hand went up and down in a jerky stabbing motion. My heart was racing, and if anyone was with me, I would have felt incredibly embarrassed. I covered my mouth and made my way past Robo Jason. The fog was getting to be a little much. I was beginning to feel lightheaded as I found the door to room 3. I placed my hand to the knob and jerked it back in pain. The knob was extremely hot. I placed my hand on the door itself and felt that it was warm. I couldn't hear anything from the other side. I put my ear up to the warm wood, expecting to hear a fire, and heard nothing. I assumed that it was just a warm, like they were pumping heat into it, like the final room in the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at Disneyland. I shook the corner of my dress and wrapped it around my hand, turning the doorknob as fast as I could, and I flung myself into room 3. There was no fire, just darkness, and it was freezing cold. Room 3 wasn't like the other rooms. It wasn't like the other rooms at all. At that moment, I knew that something wasn't right. I tried to make out anything in the room, but I couldn't even see my hands grasping for the doorknob. That now wasn't there. I was trapped. I must have been turned around in the darkness, even though I didn't move once. I must have gotten turned around in all this darkness. At the moment, a light on the ceiling flashed on. A single spotlight pointing directly down, illuminating the small table, and on this small table was a flashlight. Even though I couldn't really see where I was going, I moved forward. The light on the ceiling was enough to make my way to the table. As I reached for the flashlight, I noticed a small tag attached to the handle. To Maggie from management. The moment I finished reading, the light above me turned off, and I was again left in dark. I fumbled with the flashlight for a second before I was able to turn it on. From what seemed like every direction, a low and rumbling hum surrounded me. My heart was pounding, and I started to spin in place, darting the beam of the flashlight all around me. There was nothing in the room, but after a while I noticed something terrifying. It could have been my imagination, but I could see a figure dart away at the last second wherever the beam of light hit. I began to panic. I started to turn back away from the small table, unsure which direction I was going. The hum was getting louder, and when I started feeling and when I starting feel the presence of whatever it was that was dodging the light, my hands shook wildly as I frantically shined the light in whatever direction I could think of. It was always there, just barely escaping back into the darkness every time, but it was getting closer. My eyes started to well up with tears. I thought I was going to drop the flashlight. I was shaking so badly until I saw it. The light set directly on a small number 4. It was written on a piece of paper and taped to a wooden door in the corner. And taped to a wooden door in the corner. I ran as fast as I could with the flashlight pointed directly in front of me. I could feel it behind me. The hum was getting louder, and I felt its breath on my neck. I was sprinting at the point, only a few more feet to go. In one motion, I grabbed the handle, twisting, and slammed it shut behind me. I was now in the 4th room. I was outside. I wasn't in the house anymore. What awaited me after opening the door to room 4 was what looked like a cave. I looked down to the ground and I noticed something strange and disturbing. The ground wasn't made of grass or rock or dirt. It was wood paneling. It was the same floor as in previous rooms. This was room 4. Somehow I was still in the house. There were a few torches mounted to the side of the rock surrounding me, and the cave beyond was pitch black. The torches looked like they could be taken down. So I walked over to the closest one and unsheathed it from its mounting piece. My body was covered in sweat, and I slowly made my way into the cave. The hum was gone, hopefully for good. No other noise met me inside the cave, but there was a slight breeze. The cave seemed to go on forever, and I was walking for what felt like hours until I saw a faint blue light. I walked toward it cautiously, but at a decent pace. The light was an opening, the end of the tunnel. I started walking a little faster. I always hated cramped spaces like caves and tunnels. In a few moments, the exit was within feet, and before I knew it, I was at the end, and that's exactly where I was. The end. At the exit of the cave, the ground dropped off to a cliff, and there was no other way to go. I looked back into the cave behind me. I knew there wasn't any turns. It was a straight tunnel. I turned and looked down over the edge. What I saw made my stomach turn worse than it ever did before. What I saw was an ocean, water all around, with nothing else in sight. The drop must have been 100 feet, and a small rock formation at the bottom. After a few seconds of studying the rocks, my stomach turned more than I thought possible, and my body broke into a fresh sweat. The rocks formed a number. The rocks formed a 5. So I'm guessing it consumes to the person's fear, because we all know room 4 in the part 1 was not the same as the one she's getting now. I stood up and backed away from the edge. I hated heights. I was stopped by a wall that shouldn't have been there. I turned around and was met with a terrifying sight. The cave was gone. I was face to face with a solid stone wall, the side of whatever mountain this was. I had to keep telling myself I was still in the Noan house. I didn't leave. Clearly this isn't an actual mountain, but it felt so real. I turned back and looked over the cliff again. There was no way. This house had been pretty messed up before now. I was outside for God's sake, but what it expected me to do now was just too much. I knew what those rocks down there meant. That was the entrance to room 5. There was no stairs leading down, no other paths to use. I was trapped again. The house wanted me to jump. I sank to the ground and curled into a ball. I couldn't do it. There was no way I could jump off of a cliff and onto a jagged rock formation 100 feet below. My mind was split in two. I knew that I was still inside, but my surroundings screamed in my ear the opposite. I stayed there on the wooden ground for a while. At that point, I had lost all concept of time after what seemed like weeks. I finally stood up slowly and made my way to the edge of the cliff and looked down. The giant five taunted me to jump. I knew I couldn't do it, and it taunted me. And then the hum returned, the low and distant hum. It seemed to come from behind me, resonating within the mountain. I don't know what came over me, but after hearing that sound, something inside me lit up. I clenched my eyes shut and I jumped. The wind was rushing up as I fell, and a deep fear washed over me. I was going to die. I was going to smash into those rocks and die. They were going to tear me apart, and I was going to die. I didn't dare open my eyes. I just fell. Even with the loud wind around me, the hum was now deafening. I just wanted it to be over. I just wanted it to be over. I just wanted it to hit the rocks, and I wanted it to be over.
You don't want to know about it here, but I'll tell you one thing. The moon, it comes crashing into Earth.
And then I stopped. I wasn't falling anymore, but I never hit the rocks. I opened my eyes and looked around. I was standing on the familiar wood panel of the house. The hum was gone and silence took its place. I had made it. I was in room 5. I don't know how it happened, but I was in room 5. The feeling of dread was gone. I was just incredibly happy to be alive. After a few moments to collect myself, I decided to look around at the rest of the room. My happiness left me fast. The room was empty. The walls matched the floor, and the ceiling matched the walls, and the walls had no doors or windows. I was in a sealed box. Then I realized I didn't make it. I wasn't safe. I had made it out of the 4th room, but only to enter room 5, and there was no leaving it. At that moment, I wondered if David had been in this room. I wondered if he had jumped off that 100-foot cliff and ended up stuck in the room, and if he did, that means he got out. He wasn't here. I was alone. He got out, and I would too. The thought of David escaping the room gave me newfound confidence, and a second wind filled my spirit. I was going to get out of this room. I was going to get out of this room, find David, and get us the hell out of here. I walked around the perimeter of the wall and felt for any sort of inconsistencies. Nothing. The walls were flawless. Barely a scratch on them, let alone some secret exit. I started to knock at random places on the wall. They were completely solid. The confidence started to leave me. I was running out of ideas, and that's when she spoke to me. "Maggie, you shouldn't have come here, Maggie." I nearly jumped out of my skin, if that was possible. I was still facing the wall, and the voice had come from the middle of the room. The voice was that of a little girl. At least that's what it sounded like. And I turned around slowly, and my eyes fell on who spoke to me. I was right, a little blonde girl, no more than 7 years old, with light blue eyes and a long white dress. She smiled at me and spoke again. Well, at least this room is similar to the last one that David was in. "But now that you're here, let's play a game." There was something horrifying about that little girl. She wasn't scary like those horror girls are in those Japanese movies. She looked completely normal. If I saw her walking down the street, I would have just walked right on by. But looking into her eyes, I felt complete terror. Jumping off of a cliff was scary, but I wouldn't jump off 20 cliffs twice as high if it meant I could take back 1 minute of looking into her soulless eyes. After a moment of staring, I finally spoke. "What game?" "Who are you?" I mumbled. "If you lose, you die. If I win, he dies." My heart sank somewhere below my feet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I knew she was telling the truth. "Which will it be?" She smiled. "Neither. I don't know where I found the courage to talk back to this demon child, but I had come too far to just let David die, and if I die, this was all for nothing. No, I chose neither. But when I saw it, reason the little girl terrified me, she was more than just a small child. Looking at her, I also saw what appeared to be a large man covered in hair, with the head of a ram. It was a horrible sight. I couldn't see one without seeing the other. The little girl stood in front of me, but I knew her true form. It was the worst sight I had ever seen. Too bad. And with that, she was gone. I was alone again in an empty, silent room. Only this time, something was added. A small table where she stood appeared from nowhere, as though it was I was alone in an empty... Okay. Only this time something was added. A small table where she stood appeared from nowhere, as though it was there the whole time. There was nothing on it, but I couldn't tell from where I was. I walked up to the table and looked at the small object. It was a small razor, like one you would find in an X-Acto knife. I reached out to pick it up, and as I did, a scream left my mouth. When my hand came into view, I saw something that was never there before. It looked as though something was branded into my skin, a single number 6. I looked back to the razor and noticed the tag attached to it. To Maggie from management. Thought you may need this. After reading the note, I started sobbing uncontrollably. Tears were rushing down my face, harder than they ever have in my life. I had never cried like that, and I don't think I ever will again. I fell to the ground and sunk my head into the hardwood floor. I was sobbing for hours just lying there on the ground, and then the crying stopped and depression set in. I don't know why I was crying. It wasn't about David. It wasn't even about how I was stuck there. There were still no doors in this room. I was still trapped, and that's not why I was sad. I was in the deepest depression possible. Complete and emotionless depression. I felt empty and clawed my way up from the ground and steadied myself against the table. My eyes fell on the razor and I picked it up. I was going to kill myself. I couldn't handle it anymore. I had had it. David was probably dead. I was trapped in here. It was over. I pressed the razor against my wrist right above the 6 that had appeared on my skin. The sobbing came back and I just stood there crying with the razor pressed against my wrist. David was dead. I was about to die. Nothing mattered anymore, and with one deep cut, I sliced down my wrist. Immediately after slicing down my wrist, I was no longer in room 5. I didn't die. I knew that for sure. The depression was gone, but I was by no means happy. Tears were still finding their way down my face. The room I was in was similar to the one previous, and again, it had no doors. There wasn't any lamps, but somehow I was still able to see everything clearly. The room was completely empty, but before I had time to think of what to do next, it went dark and the hum from before returned. I covered my ears in protest. It was louder than it ever was, but it was over in a moment, and the lights returned. Only this time, something was added to the room, and then I screamed. There in the middle of the room, strung up by chains and naked from the waist up, was David. It looked like he was tortured. Knife wounds littered his chest and arms. David! I ran up to him as fast as I could. He was conscious. I saw his chest move up and down, but he wasn't speaking. And that's when I noticed what was etched into his chest. I dropped to my knees as I saw it. The 7 stared at me as though it had eyes. I heard David try and speak, and I got to my feet and got as close as I could to him. David! David, can you hear me? Maggie, what are you doing here? His voice was slight, and he was talking, and I was thankful for that. David, I'm trying to save you. How do I get you down? There were large padlocks on the chains holding him in place. I looked around the room for any sort of key, but all I found was a small knife in one of the corners. The metal was way too thick for that knife to even dent it, so I disregarded it as useless. I went back to David. It looked like he was on the verge of death, and then I felt the pocket vibrate. It startled me something awful. I took the phone out of the pocket as I suspected. One unread text. I flipped open the phone. That isn't me. I didn't know what to think. David was right there in front of me, but that text was from the first number that contacted me. It was the first text I received from David that mentioned the no in-house Maggie. I heard his voice clearly with my ears and my mind. It seemed like his voice was coming from all sides. Maggie, you have to go on. What are you talking about? How? I was face to face with David, or whatever it was that was chained up here. The knife. He made a slight movement of his head toward the corner. Go get it. I ran and was immediately back with the knife clenched in my hand. Within a few seconds, I had no idea what was going on, but I needed to save him and would do anything. Now stab me in the chest. What? I was shocked. David hung there, staring directly into my eyes. You have to run the knife through the 7 in my chest. It's the only way to save us both. No. I stumbled backward. No, you're not making any sense. Maggie. He was screaming now. His eyes looked frantic. The side of his mouth curled with a twisted grin. Maggie, stab me now. It's the only way. I looked down at the knife in my hand. My head felt as though it was being struck with a bat. I was at a complete loss. I clenched my eyes shut tight and felt the knife in my hand. Maggie, and with a scream and a thrust, I stabbed the knife into David's chest. I don't know what came over me. I just knew it was the only way. I opened my eyes and saw his face. It was terrified. Tears slid down his cheeks, and David looked me in the eyes. Why did you do that? He couldn't fool me. I know that wasn't David. It would have been, or else I wouldn't have been able to stay. It couldn't have been, or else why would or else I wouldn't have been able to stab him. I know it wasn't. His eyes rolled back as the knife left him, but that's when it changed. The 7 on his body was gone. The blood dripped down into the ground, into a pool below me. The crimson liquid stretched